theater, and I've never been in a DLD. I'm quite surprised. I'm not used to that. I hope I can adapt a little bit. And forgive me for not being a typical DLD speaker. The last 2 decades have seen a dramatic increase in public awareness of psychiatric disorders, leaving us with the impression that we see with depression and anxiety some modern times maladies. Whether they really increase is hard to know, since we have not accepted laboratory measures that make diagnosis objective. We have to rely on what the patients tell us, the verbal information. What we can say proudly already is that the fight against stigma and discrimination was successful, and today many more people than in the past are communicating their diagnosis, and they're accepting their diagnosis. What we also can say is that depression has to be taken very, very seriously. Depression has many socioeconomic consequences, let alone the individual suffering and the elevated risk for other diseases. For example, depression that is not successfully treated is increasing the risk for each individual for cardiovascular disease, for diabetes, and for the dementias. And what is strange also about depression is that basic and clinical research has, despite all efforts, not yet elucidated the mechanism that causes depression. Despite that, we have treatments that work. In severe depression, antidepressants are first-line treatment, and whenever feasible, combined with a pragmatic form of psychotherapy. It is a sobering fact that patients are often reluctant, the physical or, if you will, biological nature of the disease. Natural science may be successful in explaining a disease mechanism. They not even attempt to resolve the meaning of a disease for the individual. Patients ask questions of meaning and purpose of their individual disease. They're reluctant to consider their individual suffering as a deviation of the norm. This general consideration strongly demands a departure from the current one-size-fits-all treatment that is complemented by a number of other disadvantages, as these drugs takes too long until they work in too few patients, and they have too many side effects. Nevertheless, the advantage of current therapies over treatments up to the 19th century is tremendous. Think of 200 buckets of cold water were poured over the poor patient that were fixed in the bathtub, or even more brutal, patients were put in a kind of a centrifuge and whirled around until they felt giddy and started vomiting. The field had to wait until 2 Swiss psychiatrists, the late Roland Kuhn and Jules Angst, discovered that a drug called imipramine is an effective antidepressant. Up to now, all antidepressants that are prescribed follow the mode of action of this first antidepressant. And that is kind of disappointing that nothing new has been developed than some drugs that enhance the signaling of certain transmitters from one nerve cell to the other. Why am I telling you this? It is important to note that both clinician scientists knew nothing about specific gene variants underlying depression, and at that time, serotonin as a relevant neurotransmitter was unidentified. It was careful clinical observation and smart interpretation of highly experienced, wise clinicians. This drug and all the followers changed our field radically. One important and most obvious result was the dramatic drop in suicides. We may ask, what will be the next breakthrough? What will be the next revolution in our field? Or is there no need for that? Is all fine? I don't think it is. In the light of this increase of antidepressant prescriptions and also prescriptions of other pharmaceutical products meant to improve mental illness, it is surprising that most big pharmaceutical companies have left research and development of antidepressants. While markets grow, revenues decrease because the markets get saturated with generic drugs, with drugs that had lost their patent protection. What has happened? There are two main reasons. One is that the animal models used in basic science are not predictive for antidepressant effects. And the other clinical reason is more complex. New drugs that were developed and were targeting more specific mechanisms were tested if they would become new age treatments. The problem of that strategy is obvious. If you don't know the exact mechanism that underlies your depression, you better take a drug that is unspecific and works on all possible pathways. Only if you know which specific mechanism underlies the depression in an individual, a specifically acting drug is superior to an unspecific drug. The more specific your drug is, the more you need to know about your individual patient. That is the fundament of tailored medicine. The field has seen a myriad of studies with new specific drugs, but all the trials were negative. That is, the new drugs were not superior to placebo. In reality, these studies were not negative, but failed, as they failed to stratify the patients according to the underlying mechanism. Other impediments were related to the failure, but they were more on the economic side. There were phenomenal returns of investment in the past that created risk aversiveness because of the business model that had worked in the past. Upper management thought, why should we leave that? And now it's too late because of the patent protection issue I mentioned. We are up to now not able to apply biomarkers that allow to attribute the right drug to the right patient. That is already possible in other medical specialties, primarily in oncology, and we have heard a beautiful talk about that, where diseases like leukemia, for example, can be broken down with biomarkers to a number of diseases that are mechanistically different and respond differentially to diverse drugs. How can psychiatry catch up with oncology? From my view, the most promising repository for innovative drugs is the stress hormone system. We all know that we respond differentially to stressors. Some patients carry a genomic risk that makes them susceptible to depression once they are exposed to enduring stress. Other patients or other people carry a genetic variant that makes them more resilient towards stress. They will not develop depression when stressed, but they are not protected against depression. If they get a depression, another mechanism other than the stress hormone system is involved. So today, with gene tests and biomarkers, we are able to separate these patients where stress hormones play a causal role from those where the stress system is not important. One prominent candidate here is a neuropeptide whose long name we abbreviate with CRH. This molecule is produced in the brain and is the master hormone that coordinates behavioral and metabolic adaptation to stress. If stress endures, CRH-dependent depression emerges, and in that case, and only in that case, a CRH blocker is the right drug. In all studies with CRH blockers, this possibility, that is the objective identification of those having a CRH problem, was missed. It was given to everyone with depression. The result was that outcome of these studies was negative, and further development was put on hold. In the wake of that disappointment, the future of personalized, individualized, customized, precision medicine, whatever you may call it, was challenged, culminating in the question, can society afford personalized medicine for the individual? As outlined on that slide, the clear, straightforward answer is yes, it can. And the key message here is it can because the study costs and development of a new drug is something around $800 million or more, and 85% of the costs come from the clinical studies. In personalized medicine, the number of studies you have to do until you find an effect is much smaller, so you save a lot of money, and that is why the key message here, yes, it can afford that. I said at the beginning that the individual patient and the practicing doctors become reluctant to accept that neuroscience-based discoveries for better treatments are also attending the patient's individual needs. In fact, tailored personalized medicine picks up of Freud's perceptions. It takes on board the individual perspective, however, on the basis of neuroscience, not on exploration of human mind. The most important change is that the individualized medicine is the departure from statistical medicine, where patients sampled under a diagnostic category are viewed as being equal regarding causal mechanisms and treatment conditions. Individualized medicine is much more quickly addressing the ill human being and discourages endless sticking on animal experiments. It is understandable that a young scientist interested in such complex behavioral traits as depression, but having a time-limited contract during which he has to finalize a doctoral thesis, is also interested to complete his work in the given time. The eminent scientist, François Jacob, addressed that in a wonderful book of Flies, Mice, and Man, and concluded research is the art to solve a solvable problem. A complex trait in the mouse clearly seems to be more easily resolved than human depression. That is one reason why we see an overabundant number of animal experiments targeting depression. In fact, we learned it the hard way, and I'm not an exception here, that extrapolation of depression-like behavior from animals to humans is of limited value. That includes, unfortunately, also the discovery of innovative treatments. Also, the dogma from the famous Jacques Monod, anything found to be true of E. coli must also be true of elephants, points into that direction. It has led us astray, and we see many studies in worm, fish, fly, and mice published in prestigious journals with little meaning for clinical science and practice. Currently, we witness the genomic revolution. Every day we learn about newly discovered genes that help us to understand why we are, how we are, what helps us to stay healthy, and which genes convey the risk to get sick. We also learned how complex the interplay between genes is, and that genes contribute only a fraction to complex behavior. The genetic endowment of a chimpanzee is not different from human. The fact that the sea anemone, not bigger than a fingertip, has as many genes as human ape is surprising, and for some of us, maybe also a bit disturbing. The famous fish, coelacanth, which has not changed the phenotype over millions of years, has as many base pairs as human. The lungfish, the fish predating all animals that walk on land, has a genome comprising not less than 100 billion base pairs. Remember, the human has only 3 billion base pairs. And the world record is a spruce, the Christmas tree, with 150 billion base pairs. Apparently, the sheer number of genes is not very informative, and we should not be too gene-centric. I mentioned that genes do not act alone, and our phenotype, the observable characteristic of our organism at any given time, resulting from gene-environment interaction, is the new science called epigenetics, which we're only beginning to understand. That is why I'm showing you this picture of a little butterfly that looks totally different in winter and summer. The only factor that changes over time are seasons. The genes have not changed, but the environmental effect on the phenotype is huge. If you look at the picture, you think they're two different animals. It's the same, different seasons. That again is a reason why extrapolation of animal experiments to humans are of limited value if we deal with such extremely complex traits as depression. That is on strike now. Can anyone help me here? Here's another one. Okay. Oops. Sorry for that. That again is a reason for extrapolation for animal experiments is of limited value because the trait is so complex. And what you see on that slide is that there are so many changes in the human brain compared to the animal brain. I will only pick on one of them. If you put all the neurons we have in our brain together, we end up with a string of 5.8 million kilometers. That would allow us to coil our nerve cells that we have in our brain 145 times around the globe. And there are many other numbers which are quite impressive on that slide. And that is also clear to us that if you look at the brain of a human, there's where each neuron has, each of the 100 billion neurons has the possibility to interconnect with another neuron 10,000 times, that the connectivity is even more important than the function of an individual neuron. And that also explains why the conclusions from a single nerve cell or a small animal to a human is of limited value. The consequences become also obvious when looking at the different brain sizes. On the left side, you have a mouse with 70 million neurons. On the right side, you have the human brain with 90 billion neurons. And if you look at the cortex, the upper part, it is much more developed, and maybe only humans have that. And only the humans have a gene that coordinates that special sizing and folding. And exactly the cortex is the area of the brain where we believe the neuropathology of human depression takes place. And when I say that, you may ask, will we ever be able to understand how the human brain works? I'm skeptical and believe a full one-to-one understanding of our human brain with our human brain is illusionary. However, any pessimism that we will be unable to translate certain neuroscience findings into clinical practice is totally inappropriate. In the last few moments of my discourse, I will share with you an example that tailored treatment of depression is not something that occurs in the remote future. It is happening right now. Our brain is crossed by capillaries at a length of 400 miles, essential to provide sufficient nutrients. Remember, I showed you in the previous slide that the brain weighs 1.5 kilograms, so it is not more than around 2% of our total body weight. However, it burns up 20% of the energy we consume with eating and drinking. And a small kid with 5 years burns up even 40%. The brain is not able to regenerate in a way we know it, for example, from our skin. Therefore, it has to protect itself from all possible endangerments. One such protective mechanism is carried out by molecules that sit in the walls of small blood vessels. They act as a kind of a custodial molecule. When the antidepressant drug comes close to the wall of the blood vessel, it is taken up with this custodial molecule and it changes the configuration and it's pushed back into the bloodstream. Now comes the big thing. The molecules that work as pump preventing the entry of the drug into the brain are encoded by a gene that we name ABCB1 gene. That gene can vary from patient to patient. This variance determines the efficiency of the custodial molecule. In other words, there exist gene variants where the custodial molecule is very efficient. In that case, the drug cannot penetrate into the brain, and the custodial molecule does not know that there's a depression behind. It does not know that this drug would help the brain. It just pushes it back into the bloodstream. A drug that is not recognized may be much better in that case. And some patients that have a efficient pump because of their genes are not able to respond to a given drug because the drug does not enter into the brain. And the twist in the story is that not all antidepressants are recognized by this custodial molecule, and therefore it is better to give a drug if the custodian is very efficient, that is not recognized by this custodian molecule. You see, now with a gene test, the doctor has the opportunity to differentiate, saying, okay, because of your gene test, I better don't give you the drug I wanted to give you. I better give you one that is not recognized, and because your gene variant would not allow you to have that drug going into the brain. So that is something with an enormous consequence, because for the clinician, it is the very first time in psychiatry that a gene test allows to make a decision with a huge clinical impact. To cut a long story short, the patient benefits that he receives the right drug at the right dose and responds much earlier than with a randomly chosen drug. The doctor benefits because he is informed how a genotype-based therapy can maximize treatment outcome and minimize side effects. And last but not least, the insurance companies, including our host, can benefit because patients have shorter depression episodes, less days of sick leave, and moreover, studies showed that a patient treated according to his genotype has a much lesser likelihood to get another depressive episode, which also costs a lot of suffering and a lot of money. And that success was enabled by a joint effort of the Max Planck Society and our company, which I now represent after having been more than 25 years at helm of the Max Planck Institute of Psychiatry. The key message we have here is that this success was only made possible because we closely adhered to the human patient and followed a statement from Protagoras 2,500 years ago, man is the measure of all means. I thank you for listening.